Hi, my name is Rhonda, and today I'm going to be talking to you about loneliness because loneliness sucks. And what that means to me is that the word loneliness that was created in the 1600s and a meaning was given to it and has been passed on down through time for centuries. And so today it still has that meaning. And I have been experimenting a little bit with my thoughts with regards to loneliness and feeling irrelevant. And I don't get lonely very often. And I would say lonely is probably not a big part of my life. I do feel lonely sometimes. But I have experienced a major depression years and years and years ago. And that was a different kind of lonely feeling. That was a feeling of despair and also not being relevant in anybody's life. I'm not going to go over exactly why we feel lonely or dig up our past or go back and determine how we got to this lonely state or why we feel lonely every now and then. Mine is usually a trigger, and a trigger that I feel irrelevant. I've felt irrelevant many times in my life. I mean, pretty much practically my whole life, on and off. But I don't suffer from loneliness, and we have to look at the definition that's been given that word because it's like going to the doctor and he says, well, you have 3 months to live. And so you believe the doctor and you die in 3 months versus if you went to a doctor and the doctor said, hey, we're not sure exactly. We know what you have isn't really all that great, but we can't really tell you how long you're going to live because we don't know. And how could they know? The way when we think about lonely, you kind of have to go back with the teachings that we've done or what you've learned on intuition, boundaries, and synchronicity. And if you take all of those three different things and think of them as rivers flowing into one river, and that is the flow, that is your genuine self. And so during loneliness, we don't have those connections. We don't have those things going together. The only thing that we can do with loneliness is work on ourselves. I volunteered for several organizations throughout my whole lifetime, and I can tell you that I don't have one single friend from the hundreds of people that I volunteered with. And I think some of us are looking for friends and relationships, but I think we have to do a little bit deeper dive on ourselves. Many people might be lonely because they're dwelling in the past. I had once learned that depression is caused by living in the past, and anxiety is caused by living in the future. And so, if you're anxious or depressed, you're not really living in the present moment. The past is a memory. The past will never happen again, and we do have memories of it. And there are certain traumatic experiences that we need to work through. I was on in counseling on and off for about 25 years, from the age of 25 to 50. So I do know all about that. But but the past only exists in our memories. And I think a lot of people who are lonely are also depressed and anxious because they're not living in the present. The only way that we can bring the past into ourselves, into our present, is by remembering it and by talking about it. I used to do that. I would bring up things from my past and talk to them and beat it to death. And I finally figured out, and it was based on a job that I left a couple of months ago. And I was, even in my previous videos, I'm going through it and it's so negative. And it just drags and drags and all this stuff that I bring up from my past. And even after those videos, I remember feeling kind of down. So when people ask me now why I left my job, I just say, because I didn't want to work there. I have a flicker of a memory of it, but I'm not dragging up my past again. And I think that's part of what has made me feel lonely in the past, is dragging up all this stuff from the past. One of the ways that we can deal with loneliness is to elevate our consciousness. And that is when our insides and what's going on external from us match. And that is living in the present. And so, one way to defeat loneliness is to, first of all, stop thinking of it, dragging up the past, living in the present moment. And you know what, I have read all these articles and I've done all these things. I've done so much research on almost any subject you could possibly imagine, And none of them helped me. None of them at all helped me. And I've been trying to figure out why. You read an article and it says, get a hobby, join a club, go for a walk with a friend. And I think those are temporary fixes. But what's really needed is an intimate relationship with ourselves before we can reach out to the world. And reaching out through the world from a conscious point of view when you're living in the present is much, much, much easier than living in the past or in the future. For one thing, you're not overthinking things. It's not a think, 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 think. When you're in the present, you're really not thinking. You have thoughts. And I'm not talking about preparing for things in the future or learning from things in your past. I'm talking about, consciously not bringing them up or making conscious decisions all the time. Decision, action, decision, action. And once you can get your boundaries aligned and your intuition aligned and your synchronicity in line, and you get in that flow and you can learn how to be your genuine self. I think that's part of what loneliness is too, is that we don't give ourselves permission to be who we really are. We hold back on who we are because we're afraid of what other people think. And because we're afraid of what other people think, it's harder to develop those deep, intimate relationships. And so, what it has to boil back down to is, what do you think? What do you think about yourself? What are you willing to accept about yourself? How can you find your purpose? I think, I heard that for a long time before I really understood what finding out what your purpose is. And basically, it's jumping outside the box, taking risks, and changing the way that you think. One of the things that I thought of was with being lonely or loneliness is it's like, why are you giving it your time? Don't you have other things that you'd like to spend your time on? It's an interesting concept. And if you're suffering from loneliness, and I'm not giving medical advice, a lot of people might need professional help, and that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just talking about a way to help people cope and try to stay away from that loneliness by setting up these different tools that you have to use whenever something comes up, because loneliness can sneak up on you too. And then it's a surprise, surprise. One day you wake up and you go, oh my gosh, I'm so lonely. That happened to me a couple of months ago because I've been single for 11 years and I've never really been lonely. My adult children lived with me for a period of time, but I had 5 years to really get to know myself. And even a couple of months ago, I woke up and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm like, I'm lonely. I can't believe I let this happen to me. What is going on? And that's when I determined that I didn't have that relationship with myself. I didn't trust myself enough to be able to make it in this world. And when I quit my job, my consciousness raised. When I started going forward with the things that I wanted to do with my education and learning is another great resource if you're lonely. I'm not searching on loneliness either. I searched on loneliness and oh my gosh, it was so depressing. And I'm not saying that the criteria that's listed in a lot of articles and videos isn't going to, that they're not going to work. I'm just saying that there's got to be other alternatives because people are lonely. They're lonelier now than they ever have been. And these articles have been around forever. And I've read the same thing over and over and over and over and over again. And there is no cure for loneliness. But then what is loneliness? Why, like I said, that word didn't even exist until the 16th century. And then people started giving this definition to it, just like we give a definition to it. I feel these ways, I have these certain emotions, and so I must be lonely. Well, what happens when we start telling ourselves things, saying, "Oh, I'm so unhappy and I'm never going to be in a relationship." And well, whatever you're saying and whatever you're thinking, the universe is listening to you. Wherever you're putting your energy into and whatever you're thinking about, the universe is listening and they're saying, boy, they're sure thinking about that a lot. That must be what they want. So I'm going to give it to them. So if you're thinking that you're lonely all the time and you're sitting around telling yourself that you're lonely all the time, you probably will be lonely and you will stay lonely. Part of the series of videos that I have now and that I'm coming up with are going to be about how to raise your consciousness. And loneliness is one of the subjects that I'm going to bring up. So, when I brought up the subconscious and the conscious mind, what I mean by that is your subconscious is your autopilot. And a lot of people are walking around on autopilot. And those are the programs that we've learned throughout life or through our parents or our grandparents or everywhere we go. There's all these programs that we're dealing with. It could be social media. It could be the narrative that the news has. And that subconscious tries to rule our life. And what we need to do is raise our consciousness so that we can start living in the present and start living with purpose. Living in our subconscious is like driving a car. We've learned it, we have the muscle memory for that, and we don't really need to think about driving a car, although some people probably should think about things more when they're driving a car. And that's our subconscious, and our subconscious and our consciousness, when you start trying to change yourself from within, they're going to be in a battle. They're going to be fighting against each other, and your subconscious is going to want to end. Your subconscious is kind of like your ego, and it needs to be in control, and it needs to be in charge, and it's bossy, and makes all these rules that you have to live by. And I determined a while ago that all these rules that I was living by, well, I didn't like them very much. Even from the simplest things, from how you load the dishwasher to how you cook your meals to how you interact with relationship with your friends and families, how you do anything pretty much. And if you're not conscious or raising your consciousness, that subconscious is going to take over, and you're going to be like a walking zombie. So what we need to do is try to, bring ourselves back into the present, kind of like working both ends with anxiety and depression to get to the center point of where you're conscious and you're making decisions and you're living in the present. Say, I see a lot of times I see people all over the place on their phones. They can be sitting at lunch with someone and they're both on their phones. And it just kind of boggles my mind for one thing, but that's kind of like subconscious habit. You sit down, you get out your phone, you start strolling where you're not really consciously thinking, oh, I'm going to go on and I'm going to get on Facebook right now and I'm going to look at one thing. And I don't go through that process. Maybe some people do. I just pick up my phone and start going and start strolling, and I don't even think about it. And so subconsciously, it kind of takes over, and I'm not even consciously aware of it sometimes. I could be on Facebook for like a half hour before I even know it feels like 2 minutes. And that's kind of running in your subconscious. And also make sure what you're taking in. Social media is an easy way to take in things that aren't that are not good for us. You have to pick around, you have to pick what kind of energy you want in your life. You want to pick what you're exposed to, with the news, the narratives, and make sure that that's what you want in your life. Like I said, with the past, when we remember the past, we bring up those memories, and they are part of our present now. Same thing with the news and the media is especially with the news. I mean, they put all this stuff, it's all negative. It's all negative. And so I don't watch the news anymore at all. I listen to or I read a couple of the headlines and I pick up on things just enough. I like to stay, informed and educated on things, but I don't let that stuff in anymore. I can't do anything about it. So, I may as well enjoy life and live in the present moment. And so should you.